everyone. Today we are going to be going over transformation rules. As I always start out with my videos, we are going to need to know the rules and more specifically what these mean as well. So we're going to start off with our rotation rules. Our rotation rules mean we are taking a figure and rotating it around a certain point at a certain amount of degrees. So let's take a look at our rules that we have to have memorized to be able to complete these problems accordingly. So my first rule is 90 degrees clockwise and 270 degrees counterclockwise. Our rule is we go from our original point x, y, and then when we're getting our new point, we switch those two spots, the x and the y spots, we switch them, and then we're changing the sign of our x value. So we're going to change the sign after we switch of that second term. We must have this memorized. And then we have 90 degrees counterclockwise, which is the same thing as 270 degrees clockwise. It's the same steps where we're going to take the 2 points, we're going to switch our x and y, and then we are going to change instead now our y sign. This is not saying, though, that our new first coordinate is going to have to be negative. We're just taking the sign of our coordinate and changing it. So if it's a negative, it becomes a positive. If it's a positive, it becomes a negative. It makes sense that our 90 degrees counterclockwise and 270 degrees clockwise are the same, because if we're going 90 degrees counterclockwise and 270 clockwise, they're going to end up at that same point. Finally, our last rule is 180 degrees, which takes our original coordinate and it just changes the sign of both. Like I said before, it's not saying they both have to be negative, we're just changing the sign of both of them. So now we have our reflection rules, which means we're taking our pre-image and reflecting it across the x or the y axis. So we are reflecting it. So we're going across it. It's almost like a mirror. Your reflection is opposite from what you see. So when we're reflecting it across the x-axis, the rule is we take our original points and we're going to change the y coordinate of it, the sign of the y coordinate. So if it's a positive, it becomes a negative. If it's a negative, it now becomes a positive. It's different than what we would usually think, because normally we're like, oh, we're reflecting across the x-axis. We're changing the x term, the x coordinate. However, it's the opposite. So we have to train our memory to remember that we are changing the opposite coordinate sign, which makes sense. If we're reflecting it over the x-axis, our x term is staying the same and our y is changing its symbol. Now for our y-axis reflection, we are changing the sign of our x term. So our x term, it's going to become positive. If it's negative, it's going to become negative if it is a positive. And then finally, we have translations, our last type of transformation. A translation, we take our coordinate and we're going to add a number to the x, add a number to the y. When I say add a number, though, this could be adding a negative, which would be moving it left or down. If we're going up or right, we're adding a positive. X is going horizontally. So if we're moving right, we're adding to our x term. If we're moving left, we're subtracting. Y, if we're moving up, we're adding. If we're moving down, we are subtracting. Now that we have all those rules under our belt, let's apply them all to see how we would complete problems. So we have this first problem where it's telling us what our A, B, and C are. These would be considered our pre-image. Now we are going to want to determine our image based off of the rule it gives us. So they want us to rotate it 90 degrees counterclockwise. We have to remember our rule for this. So 90 degrees, I like to label as 90 degrees CC for counterclockwise. 90 degrees counterclockwise is going to be negative y, comma, x. So I'm going to take each of these points and apply this rule. So I'm going to have my A, which is 3, 2. I switched their spots. We labeled it as A prime. A prime means this is our new image. So A prime is A apostrophe. I'm going to switch the 2 spots. So now my y comes up front, my x goes behind. Because it says a negative y, I'm going to change the sign. Because this is a positive, it becomes a negative. Let's do the same thing with B prime. B prime, we switch the sign, the spots, switch the spots, which is negative 5, negative 1. And we change the sign of the first one, which is 5, negative 1. For C prime, we switch the spots, which is 0, negative 5. And then we change the sign of the first. Do not put negative 0. Negative 0 is not proper. We're going to leave it just as 0. Now let's do the second one. They want us to then reflect it over the x-axis. So when I reflect it over the x-axis, my new rule is x negative y. So we're going to use these points to apply this new rule. So this is going to be a double prime because we're doing a second thing to our original pre-image. So we're going to keep our x the same and change our symbol of the y. B double prime, keep the x the same, change the sign of the y. C double prime, keep 0 the same, change the sign of the y, and that would be my final answer. So we have to make sure we are writing this as prime, double prime, because we're doing a second transformation to it. And that would be my final answer. Let's try another problem so we can see the different types of transformations we can apply. All right, now we have this problem. We have our A, B, and C again. And we are going to first translate it 2 to the right and 4 down. We have to understand what this means first. So we have 2 to the right. Before I told you, if we are going to the right, we're adding to our x term. So this is going to say x plus 2, because we're going to the right. And then it says 4 down. So we're going to take away 4 from our y. So let's apply that to each of my points here. So when I do that, I have a prime. I am going to add 2 to my x. So 4 plus 2 is 6. I'm going to subtract 4 from my y, which is negative 7. Then I have my b prime. Add 2, which becomes 0. Subtract 4, 1 minus 4 is negative 3. Once again, this is why our integer rules come into importance. So that becomes negative 3. And then I'll put my c prime over here just for room purposes. And I add 2, which is 9. I subtract 4 from negative 5, which is negative 9. So that's after I complete it using our translation. Now we're going to rotate them 180 degrees. 180 degrees, the rule is negative x, negative y. Once again, not both of our terms are going to be negative. We're changing the sign of both of them. So I'm going to go to a double prime. We take these points and rotate them 180 degrees. So I switch the signs of both. So because this is positive 6, it's now going to become negative 6. This is negative, it's going to become positive. B double prime, 0. Once again, we're not going to put negative 0. That's just not proper. So we keep it as 0. Negative 3 is going to go to positive 3. And now we have our C prime here. We're going to go to C double prime. And we're going to switch it, which becomes negative 9. So that's positive. Now it goes to a negative. A negative becomes a positive. And I would box off all my answers so the teacher knows exactly which ones you are answering. So it's important we remember our rules, we apply them properly, we do the prime and then the double prime. Let's try one more problem so we can use up all our rules and you can see how to apply them. All right, so now we have this problem. Once again, we have our A, B, and our C, and we want to reflect it over the y-axis first. Our rule for reflecting over the y-axis is negative x comma y. So I'm going to take my A, do the prime because we're reflecting it. My x was negative 5, but it tells us to change the sign of it, so it's going to be positive 5, negative 8. My b prime, we changed the sign of the x, so it was 1, now it's going to become negative 1 comma 7. And I'm going to once again do my c prime over here, which was 2, negative 5. We changed the sign of the 2, which becomes negative 2, negative 5. Now they want us to rotate it 270 degrees counterclockwise. Our rule for that is y negative x. So I'm going to apply that. Once again, we need our double prime so we know that this is a second transformation being applied to our pre-image. So our double prime, we take the 2, this is now our xy, we take them and we switch their spots. And we're going to put negative 8 comma 5, and then it's telling us to change the sign of our original x. So instead of positive 5, it's going to become a negative 5. Same thing for the next one. We're going to switch them. So it becomes b double prime of 7, negative 1, and we switch the sign of the second, so b right I get rid of that -1 and becomes 7, 1. C double prime, same thing. We're going to switch their spots, so it becomes -5, -2, and we switch the sign of this one, so it becomes -5, 2. Box off my answers, so we know after both transformations, these are my final answers. You can write them like I did over here. It's a little tiny, but -8, -5, 7, 1, and -5, 2. Let's now look at transformations that have occurred and decide which transformation has occurred. So now we have this diagram. We have our two different triangles. Our first step is to always determine which one's the pre-image and which one's the image. The pre-image is before we do our transformation, the image is after. We look, we have EFG and E prime, F prime, G prime. The prime means we did the transformation already. So that's going to be the new transformation, the new image. So we're going to start by finding the coordinates on this triangle. I always like to just take 2 of them. Your teachers might ask you to give all 3 coordinates. I'm just going to pick 2 of them and then compare to our image and see what has occurred. So I'm going to use E and F. So my E is over 1, 2, 3. So my X is 3. My Y is up 1, so it's 1. My F is over 1, 2, 3, 4. Up 1, 2, 3, so it's 3. We have to make sure we're writing our X then our Y, because we'll get something wrong if we do not. Now, if we did E, we have to look at E prime. E prime is, our X is 1, our Y is -3. Now we have F prime. Our F prime is 1, 2, 3, 3, and down 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, -4. Now that we have these points, we have to determine what transformation occurs. We're going to look at it. What happens here to decide the transformation? So I look at this. I see my 1 is now up front. I see my 3 is now up front. So it looks like we took our X and Y coordinates and switched them. So let's at least write that down. We switched our X and Y coordinates. Then this was a +3. Now it's a -3. This was a +4, now it's a -4. So we changed the sign of our X term. So that's Y -X. We know that that's a 90 degrees clockwise rotation, which also is a 270 degrees counterclockwise rotation. So this is going to be, we have to write a 90 degrees clockwise or 270 degrees counterclockwise. And I have to write rotation. You need to tell which type of transformation has occurred, not just 90 degrees clockwise, 270 degrees counterclockwise. We need to know if it's a rotation, a reflection, a translation. So every single time, at least find 2 of the points. See what happens to their image compared to the pre-image. I write down what rule occurred, and then I think back into my memory log, which rotation, reflection, translation is this? And it is a rotation. Let's try one more problem where I give you the points instead, and we're going to determine what happens there. Now I have this problem. Like I said before, I'm giving you the points. So we're going to look at the pre-image and the image, and we're going to see what occurred between the two. So I always like to look at least 2 of them like before to see if they follow the same rules. So if I go from J to J prime, I to I prime, always make sure, because sometimes they'll try to trick you where they'll take this, put it over here. You have to make sure you're lining them up correctly. So if I look, I have 2, 3, and -4, -1. If I think of my reflection rules, if I think of my rotation rules, our numbers are never changing. They might switch their spots, they might change signs, but they're not going from 2 to 5. They're going to be still their absolute value number. So I'm going to look, 2, 3 to -4, -1. There's no switching spots here. There is no changing the sign for this to be the same. So this has to be a translation because we're adding or subtracting a certain amount to get to the other one. So if I'm going from 2 to -4, I'm getting rid of 2 to get down to 0, then I'm getting rid of 4. So if I'm getting rid of 2 and I'm getting rid of 4, that means I'm subtracting 6. So x minus 6. If I have 3 and I'm getting to negative 1, I am subtracting 3, and then to get down to 0, and I'm subtracting negative 1. So in total, I'm subtracting 3, I'm subtracting negative 1. That means I'm subtracting 4, so it's y minus 4. I'm going to check with my second point to see that this works. 5 minus 6 does give me negative 1. 4 minus 4 does give me 0. Same thing here. 5 minus 6 gives me negative 1. 0 minus 4 gives me negative 4. That's correct. So I'm going to write translate, or a translation. Because it's subtracting 6, it's going to be 6 to the left. And then it's going to be 4 down. So when you complete these problems, not only should you give the rule written like this, but you should write that it's going to be a translation 6 to the left and 4 down. This shows that you really know this information. So I hope after all these problems, you can see how you should complete transformation problems.